Today being the day that we commemorate as President's Day, which is what the third Monday of the month of February has come to be for the past several years, I felt that it would be interesting to sit here and just think about what exactly President's Day is and what exactly it is that we are commemorating. I don't know how many of you may remember this, but when I was a lot younger, we actually celebrated the birthdays of George Washington, who was born on February 22nd, and Abraham Lincoln, who was born on February 12th. And we did those individually, and we did those days to celebrate, and things were closed, and we pretty much commemorated those specific people and what they have done for this country. Gradually, I guess, since those birthdays don't always fall on the same day of the week, of course, they can end up on a Saturday or a Sunday, which of course no place is open anyway, and that's when we would commemorate the actual following Monday. And then when we started doing the Monday thing, we started to do it for both of the presidents individually, as we did before. But now it's pretty much come down to being just one Monday in the month of February rather than two separate days that we're commemorating. And of course, instead of just one or two presidents, we are commemorating the presidency itself. But sadly, I think a lot of history is being forgotten in our schools nowadays because we kind of generalize or make generic observations about a whole lot of things. And in doing so, we forget a lot of the important things that have built up to what we have today. The presidency, of course, was a new concept in the world when it was created here in the United States, when we had fought the Revolutionary War and we were victorious in essence because the British had finally been defeated and they did not want to fight us anymore because they knew it was a lost cause. And so they pulled out. One of the ideas that a lot of the people had was the notion that, well, now that the British are gone, that means that we should perhaps make George Washington the first king of America. First King George the First of America. That, of course, did not sit well with George Washington, and it certainly did not sit well with a lot of the people in the American spheres who felt that, well, we just fought off and separated ourselves from one king. We don't want to create another kind of king situation that will probably be not quite as angry against as maybe the British king across the sea, but the concept of it was still not a very pleasant one. They did not want someone to be able to sit there and to be able to mess in their business whenever he feels like it. The original idea they came up with was the Articles of Confederation. So we had 13 colonies. In the Articles of Confederation, there was a situation where each of the 13 states had a single vote within the articles to vote on issues as they came up, and if they wanted anything to be changed in the Articles of Confederation, that they would have to be unanimously accepted by all 13 colonies. Well, back then, the 13 colonies, while they agreed that the British were not the ones that they wanted running the place, the British across the sea, that is, many of them probably still consider themselves as kind of British. The states would never unanimously agree on any kind of huge change because each of them jealously held on to their own rights to control things and run things the way they do. And if you've ever been in other states than the one you live in, of course you note that there are a lot of laws in Utah that don't exist in California and vice versa, and things that might be happening in Massachusetts would be different than what they were going on in Tennessee. You would not need to have any kind of maritime ocean treaties or ocean-going vessel agreements in, say, Kentucky, the same as you would in Massachusetts. So each of the different states had their own laws that they had created, and they were not exactly eager to allow that to change. That again was another reason why they fought the British. The British wanted to change things, and a lot of them liked things the way they were. Was everyone who fought on the side of the revolution very, really big on overthrowing the king? Probably not. They were just afraid that these people wanted to change things, and we don't want them to come in and change things. This situation then was untenable, as a lot of people saw. Every time they tried to change something, it met up with a lot of roadblocks, and there was some civil unrest going on in a lot of places. During one of the sessions of the Congress that ran things there with the Articles of Confederation, someone had suggested that maybe we need to change the articles, or we need to make some changes here so that we can make the central government a little bit stronger and better able to take care of the people and to handle disputes. Not everybody was excited about that idea. They wanted things to stay the way they were, just as they were when they were fighting against the British invaders. But then another group of people managed to come out and pretty much argue. They say, look, if all we can do is amend the articles, then I suggest we amend them out of existence, because this government is not functioning well. When you have individual states like this who are independent and jealously independent, Alexander Hamilton essentially argued that they would inevitably find themselves at loggerheads with each other, because neighboring states, neighboring nations within a certain region are inevitably going to come across several disputes that can't be resolved in any other way. If one of them is stronger than the other one, the stronger one will inevitably want to dominate and overcome the other one. And if they're both the same strength, so to speak, not equal, of course, but they're roughly the same strength, then they would be fighting back and forth over whatever tidbits there were around there that they think was jealously theirs. The Constitutional Congress was formed to help to solve this problem, and not to go into a huge constitutional history, of course. The presidency, which is listed in Article 2 of the Constitution, outlined what it was that the president can do, what he was called to do, what was expected of the president to help keep law and order, to help run things, and that laws and the judiciary would be a separate branch to be dealt with by someone else. One of the results of this, of course, was something that has never happened again afterwards, and that was a president was unanimously elected to become our first president, and that was George Washington. There is no other president, of course, who has ever had that much popularity and had been able to dominate that much within the nation's history. This was at the very beginning, and he was really the figurehead of everything, and he was the one. His presence there at the Congress, of course, was what gave it legitimacy, because this was George Washington, this was General Washington, and he supports it. Therefore, we will hold on to what he has to say and what he endorses. The presidents over the years since then, of course, there's been a lot of fighting, big fights about the presidency and who should become president. If you think that the friction that's going on between two main parties today is unprecedented, to a certain degree it is, in the sense that a lot of things that go on are unprecedented. But the fight between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams when he tried to run again for president, that was a very vicious campaign, and a lot of bad blood was the result going on there until after the election was over. Then most of the bad blood had eased up, or at least it did until the next presidential election. And in America, that was kind of the case for many years. But I think nowadays too many people are not happy with the results of an election, and so they refuse to accept it. Going back to the presidency, we have had quite a few presidents who have done significant things. If you know your American history, you know that the Declaration of Independence was pretty much written by Thomas Jefferson, who was our third president. The father of the Constitution, the person who's considered the father of our Constitution, was James Madison. Then, of course, you have Abraham Lincoln, who helped to fight to keep the nation together. His initial reason for fighting that war wasn't initially to eliminate slavery. It was to keep the country together. That being the case, the freedom of the slaves was the result after the South had finally been defeated to a certain extent that they realized they couldn't fight anymore. And many of the people on the opposing side in the South finally accepted that they couldn't win. And so they were trying to get the best conditions that they could to go along with their surrender. And they were probably shocked when they saw that Lincoln was not demanding a whole lot more. The problems that happened with Reconstruction and with punishing the South, that was the result of Congress pretty much taking over things after Lincoln was assassinated. The presidency itself, if you look at the history of the people who have been president, there are a few things that kind of stand out as well. Like out of the 45 presidents that we've had, 26 of them had actually served in our military. Two of them that kind of surprised me because no one had ever really said much about it was that both Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan had served in the military, in different branches of the military. Throughout history, a lot of people feel that serving in the military is a really good bonus as it comes to people who have been presidents, though our most recent two presidents did not serve in the military. Neither Donald Trump or Barack Obama served in the military. And serving in the military, of course, does not prerequisite you from not being a good president. There are people who will argue that both of them or either of them was a good president. It's rare that you find someone who says that they like what both of them were doing. And of course, besides seeing who might have served in the military or who has had different experiences before they became president, I also went and I looked to see where in the country each of these presidents came from. As of yet, they have not changed the fact that you cannot be president of the United States without being born in the United States. So one of the 50 states the president would have to come from, or the District of Columbia or Puerto Rico would qualify as well if that should happen. But I discovered that there are 20 states that have produced presidents. Believe it or not, Abraham Lincoln was not born in Illinois. He wasn't from Illinois. He was the congressman in Illinois at one time, of course, before becoming president, but he was actually born in Kentucky. And another president that a lot of people probably think of as an Illinois president is Barack Obama. He was actually born in Hawaii. Therefore, when they ask, okay, where were the presidents from? Barack Obama was the first president to come out of Hawaii. When you look at a few other areas, you'll find that Virginia has produced the largest number of presidents, with Ohio as a close second. Virginia has produced 8 presidents. Of course, Virginia is where George Washington came from, where Thomas Jefferson came from, where James Madison came from, and Monroe came from. Then, of course, the state of Massachusetts is where both John Adams and John Quincy Adams came from. There were 4 presidents altogether that came from Massachusetts. You have 5 who came from New York. Both of the Roosevelts originated in New York, which is something that you would probably find really interesting. The state of New York has contributed a great deal to the culture of the United States, for good or for bad, however you want to see it. And of course, the most famous things that have come out of New York with the presidents, with FDR as the New Deal and how he got us through the Second World War. He was definitely instrumental in orchestrating a lot of things, and he is also the reason why there is a 22nd Amendment where you cannot run for more than 2 terms as president or serve for longer than 10 years, given, say, that the prior president died soon after he was elected, like William Henry Harrison was, who died after 32 days and was taken up by John Tyler, his vice president. So even though Tyler did not technically serve 2 full terms, he probably might have thought he could run again, but according to the amendment, 10 years is the limit, and so that's pretty much, he could not have run again in our current system. No one else really attempted to run for more than 2 terms anyway until Roosevelt, from what we've seen. The first Kennedy, Teddy Kennedy, he attempted to run again in a third-party situation, thinking he could win, but because of that, Woodrow Wilson ended up winning an election. Whether or not Wilson would have lost that election if not for that third-party challenger, you never know. Just like with Ross Perot and George H.W. Bush, people could argue, well, they would have won or they would have lost anyway, but there's always going to be that thing hanging in the air that this person was just in there to mess things up. So the presidency has been held by people from all parts of the country, and it is really interesting to see how history, where they grew up and where they worked, has shaped how they did things and what it was that they had done while they were president. There is a lot of interesting folklore that I have come across as it relates to George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and a few other presidents like FDR, but the purpose of this podcast is not to talk about folklore, but to talk about history. And as I said, I think that people really need to understand their history and learn their history themselves, rather than just simply accepting what you hear on the street from people. In a sense, word of mouth and gossip is folklore a lot of the times, and so we always encourage people to go and investigate these things themselves. Thank you so much for listening to my comments here about the presidency, and I think if you look throughout history and the things that our presidents have done, the nature of the presidency itself has really changed over the years as to what it is exactly the president's role is and what he is allowed to do as it relates through the Constitution. And you will note just how different things are today than they were during the time of George Washington. Jefferson and Washington certainly would not recognize how the presidency is today compared to what it was back then. I hope you all had a wonderful President's Day and you were able to do something really interesting, something really commemorable that you will cherish in your heart and will last forever as you continue on with your life. I thank you so much for listening in to my podcast. Until next time, I shall bid thee adieu.